Hi there, my name is Brian Harrison and I'm a Cloud Solution Architect with Microsoft, and this is the Azure 101 series. This particular video we're going to be focusing on governance and specifically Azure Policy. Now, what exactly is Azure Policy, and why do I even care about it from a governance perspective? Well, first of all, Azure Policy is a specific service inside of Azure that allows you to create, assign, and manage policies. Okay, that's not exactly very descriptive. Well, policies enforce different rules and effects over the resources that you're either trying to create, trying to manipulate, or trying to delete within the respect of your Azure subscription or your Azure resource group. So those resources can stay compliant to your specific corporate standards and service level agreements. Now, let me give you a quick example, and then I'm going to jump right into the Azure portal. Let's say, for example, that you are giving your users the ability to create their own virtual machines, but because of the location of your specific company and cost controls, you want to make sure that they are only deployed inside of the East US 2 region. Well, you can create a policy that limits the creation of resources so that they are only allowed to be created inside of East US 2. That is what's considered to be a Azure policy. So with that, let's head on over to the portal and take a look at how this is actually implemented. Now, there are two different ways that you can get access to Azure policies. One is from within your subscription object. And of course, if you're a cloud admin, you're going to have access to at least one, if not potentially multiple Azure subscriptions. And if you scroll down within the Azure subscriptions, underneath of the settings area, there is a navigation item called policies. And I can click on this particular item and it will take me to the policies blade. This is a new user interface for policies, and as you can see, it is now taking me actually outside of the subscription object and giving me access to a completely new user interface. And that's because Azure Policy is now considered to be a separate service. It is completely free, there's no extra cost. It is actually part of every single customer subscription. The other way to get access to the exact same user interface is from all services. And if I go up here to my search, I can actually type in policy, and there is Azure Policy right there. It would take me to the exact same user interface. So let's take a look at this user interface here and see what we have. First thing you'll notice is here in the overview area, there's a bunch of zeros. These let me know what initiatives or policies or resources are available, deployed, that are considered to be non-compliant. Meaning, do I have a existing resource sitting out there that may have been created before a policy was implemented that does not meet the compliancy of that new policy? An example, let's say you want to require tags on all of your resources and a specific tag name and type of value. Let's say cost center for your cost controls. And you need to make sure, of course, that it meets a standard regular expression of all numbers. That's no more than 8 characters long. Well, if someone has created a resource before that policy was implemented, that resource would show up as non-compliant here. It would then give you the ability to look at all of those resources and make the necessary modifications to make them compliant. Now, in the future, we're going to be able to allow you to automate that process, but as of right now, that is going to be a manual process. You also have the ability to see specific policies that have non-compliant resources, as well as initiatives. Now, initiatives are something that's new, and that's something we'll talk about here in a little bit. So that's where you get started. If we want to look at the overview, though, this overview gives you that same exact information, but it allows you to modify which subscription you're looking at here. That's the scope. You also have the ability to change to a resource group or a management group. And you'll see here I got a failed to retrieve management groups, and that's because the subscription that I am using is not considered to be an enterprise subscription within the scope of Microsoft. Therefore, it does not have access to a feature called management groups, which allows you to actually combine subscriptions together and use them to apply policies to all of those subscriptions at one time. It basically allows you to define the hierarchy of your company within the scope of how you would implement that inside of Azure. But I do have my different subscriptions here, and I also have my list of 3 resource groups, because policies can be applied at the management group level, the subscription level, or the resource group level. It all depends upon how granular you want your policy to be applied and how granular it is from a functionality perspective. But I would be able to actually look at the same compliances according to each of those 3 different scoping levels and then work accordingly. But this is all great. It's just giving me an overview, and I don't have anything applied right now. So let me actually show you what does in fact get applied. So the first thing is we've got definitions here. Definitions are actually your policies defined in a JSON language to state, for example, that you want to limit all resource creations to be inside of a specific region. So these ones here that you are seeing are all built in. They are provided to you by Microsoft the day that your subscription spins up. And each one of these corresponds to a different policy. So you'll see there's one here that enforces tags and values. That goes back to that example I gave a little while ago of cost center. You want to be able to enforce cost center. Now, this is a templated policy, meaning that if I wanted to actually create a policy of my own, it would allow me to say, what is the tag name that you want to be enforced, and what is the value that you want to have applied to it. Do you want to have a default value, or do you want to just enforce that someone put in a value? Things of that nature. We also have the ability to, if I scroll back up here and type search for location, here's the allowed locations built-in policy. And this is basically where I can put in an array of region names for Azure corresponding regions that says only those regions can actually be applied. So let's actually use that one as my example. And here is the actual JSON definition here. What this is saying is that if the location is not in the parameters list of allowed locations, and as you can, if you're a developer, you understand the square bracket notation as being an array, meaning that you are going to provide an array of region names. If it is not in that array and it does not equal global, then we want to deny that particular action. So this is basically stating to the user that the minute that you try and create a resource that does not fall into that parameter set, you're going to get an error from the Azure portal. Now, how does the Azure portal handle that? Well, it happens after the create step. The minute you finish the clicking of the submit button, you will actually get an error back. In other words, the policy validation step happens after you filled out the wizard in the user portal, or after you've hit run on your PowerShell script or your CLI command. It does that validation step first, then returns the error and stops the transaction from occurring. Now, let me walk you through all of that just so that you can see what this looks like. So I am going to assign this particular policy. I am going to give it the scope of my subscription. I'm not going to apply it to a specific resource group. I'm just going to go ahead and click select. So you can see here that it has now been applied to my specific subscription. I then have an exclusion here, meaning that I can actually exclude certain types of resources from this particular policy. So for example, maybe there are certain resources inside of Azure that I plan on implementing that are only available in other regions other than this particular list, as an example. So my policy definition is the allowed locations one. The name is something that you can apply yourself, as is the allowed locations. We're just using the built-in one to then apply it to our subscription. So that's the definition. I'm going to give it an assignment name of for Brian as an example. You can put in your own description if you need to. And then here's your allowed locations. So I am going to make it so that only East US 2 is an allowed location for this particular policy assignment. I'm going to go ahead and click Assign, and it has now created the assignment. So if I go back over to my subscription area and my policies again, and now look at assignments, you'll see there is my allowed locations for Brian. Now, let me walk you through what happens when I actually try and create a resource that does not fall into that specific region. So I'm just going to do something very, very simple and create a Azure storage account. We're just going to give it a quick name. I'm going to leave all of these values the same except for the location. I'm going to try and change this to Japan West. Everything else I'm just going to leave the same because I know that this is in fact going to error out. I'm also going to go ahead and choose one of my existing resource groups and leave everything else alone. Now remember, if I had set the scope of the policy assignment to be a resource group, then I would have needed to make sure that the resource group name corresponded to that in order to actually test the failure. So I'm going to go ahead and click Create here. You'll see it's doing the validation, and there is my validation error. So if I can click on this, there's my error type. And the error type, as you can see right here, is failed because of policy violation. And if you actually look at the details down below, you'll find the name of the policy assignment that forced that failure. Now, this is a very, very simple example. There is a lot of great possibilities for the built-in policies that are available. And you might be asking, well, Brian, that's great. What happens if the built-in policies don't suffice for me? Well, then you will absolutely need to be able to create a custom policy. And you do have that ability as well. And within the scope of the blog post that hopefully you found this video from, you will see the link to the policy definition location, the policy documentation, down at the bottom of the blog post inside of additional resources. And that will help you understand how you can create your own policy definitions using the available language specifications. And that language specification is constantly growing as new resource types are made available, new functionality is made available that customers will want to actually limit or restrict those pieces of functionality. So hopefully this gives you an idea of how you can get started from a governance perspective in using Azure policies. I absolutely believe that this is one of the most important pieces of governance that every single customer needs to understand for many, many different reasons. Cost controls, absolutely. Security, absolutely. But also, every customer has their own standards, and we want to make sure that you can apply those standards within the scope of your Azure deployments. Hope you got everything that you needed. See you next time.